It was a crisp Monday morning in late October when I first realized that Mark, the fresh-faced intern with the eager handshake and the coffee-stained tie, had decided I was his enemy. Not a rival. Not a passing annoyance. Not a young man eager to learn and occasionally overstepping. No, this was something far more calculated. He had decided I was an obstacle to be surgically removed. And the method he'd chosen was assassination not of the body, but of the career. A slow, methodical, paper-cut assassination designed to leave my reputation in tatters, while he stepped gracefully over the ruins. Let me rewind about 6 weeks, to the day Mark walked through our glass revolving doors for the first time. I was a senior project manager at Apex Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in industrial automation software for manufacturing plants, logistics companies, and defense subcontractors. We weren't a sexy startup with beanbags and kombucha on tap. We were a serious shop for serious clients. I'd been there for 7 years, risen through the ranks from junior analyst to team lead, built 3 successful product lines, and earned the quiet, unspectacular respect of my peers. I wasn't flashy. I never went to happy hours. I didn't post motivational quotes on LinkedIn. But I got things done. On time. Under budget. Without drama. My boss, Barbara, the vice president of engineering, had been my mentor for 5 of those 7 years. She trusted me implicitly, which is why what happened next cut so deep. Mark arrived in early September. He was 22 years old, fresh out of a respectable but not top-tier MBA program, and he carried a handmade leather portfolio that probably cost more than my first car. On his first day, he wore a tailored navy blazer, a bold choice for an office where the dress code was best described as clean but unconcerned. His handshake was firm, almost crushingly so, and he made eye contact a beat too long, the way people do when they've read too many articles about executive presence. I sat him down in my glass-walled office, the one with the whiteboard still covered in last quarter's release notes, and gave him the standard orientation speech. I explained our legacy codebase, a sprawling .NET monster held together with duct tape and the prayers of 3 senior engineers. I showed him our documentation backlog, a Google Drive folder with over 400 unresolved tickets dating back 2 years. It was tedious, unglamorous work, cross-referencing API error logs with user complaints, identifying recurring failure points, and writing clear, actionable summaries for the engineering team. "This is your bread and butter for the next few weeks," I said, pushing a printed copy of the error log schema across the table. "It's not glamorous, but it's the fastest way to learn our system's pain points. Master this and you'll understand more about Apex than most junior hires learn in 6 months." Mark nodded enthusiastically, his eyes scanning the document with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Absolutely," he said, flashing a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring but landed somewhere closer to predatory. "I'll have a dashboard for you by Friday. Visualizations, trend lines, the whole package." I chuckled softly. "Sure. Just start with the CSV exports from Q3. Walk before you run." The first week was fine. Better than fine, actually. Mark showed up at 7:45 each morning, 15 minutes before me, and stayed until at least 6:30 each evening. He asked smart, pointed questions about our data pipelines. He learned the names of all 12 people on my team within 3 days, not just their first names but their roles, their pet projects, and apparently their coffee orders. He brought me a neatly formatted summary of the Q3 error logs on Thursday, 2 days ahead of my informal deadline. It wasn't a dashboard with visualizations, but it was thorough and accurate. I began to think he might be the rare intern who actually contributed instead of just adding to the administrative overhead. Then week 2 arrived, and with it the subtle shift. Started with small things. Almost imperceptible. The way a crack in a foundation starts as a hairline fracture. A missed calendar invite here. An email chain that took a strange turn there. On a Tuesday afternoon, I asked Mark to pull raw error data from a specific date range July 15th to August 30th, so I could cross-check it against a client complaint about system latency. Instead of sending me the CSV file, he composed an email to my boss, Barbara, with a subject line that made my stomach tighten. Strategic overview of Q3 error trends. The body of the email read, "Per our conversation, I'm prioritizing a higher-level strategic overview rather than the raw logs, as I believe directional insights will drive more value for the leadership team. Please find attached a summary of key findings. Happy to dive deeper as needed." Our conversation? We'd had no such conversation. I hadn't asked for a strategic overview. I hadn't asked for insights. I had asked for a CSV file. And now Mark was presenting his own unsolicited work to my boss as if it had been authorized, while implicitly framing my original request as somehow less valuable, less strategic, less worthy of leadership attention. I waited an hour to cool down, then replied to all. "Mark, please send the raw CSV logs as originally requested. The strategic overview can be a separate deliverable for next week. But right now I need the underlying data for a client-facing analysis." His reply came 30 minutes later, addressed only to Barbara, not to me, and copied to no one else. Of course. Just wanted to ensure alignment across leadership before proceeding with tactical requests. "I'll send the raw logs shortly." I stared at that email for a long time. Tactical requests. That was how he was framing my direct instruction now. Tactical. As if I were asking him to move boxes instead of doing the foundational work that would actually teach him something. But Barbara, who had been my mentor for 5 years, forwarded his original email to me with a single line. "Everything okay with the intern?" "Fine," I wrote back, because that's what you say when you don't yet have the vocabulary for what's wrong. "Just eager. I'll handle it." But I should have paid closer attention. I should have recognized that first email for what it was, a test. Mark was testing whether I would confront him directly or let it slide. He was testing Barbara's willingness to engage with his end run around my authority. He was testing the boundaries of the organization's hierarchy, searching for weak points he could exploit later. And I, exhausted from a late-night release deployment and distracted by a looming client deadline, let it slide with a brief verbal warning the next morning. "Come to me first," I said, standing in the doorway of his cubicle with a paper cup of black coffee. "Not Barbara. That's the chain of command. If you have an idea for a strategic deliverable, great, bring it to me and we'll find a place for it. But you don't go over my head without a conversation first." "Understood." Mark looked up from his laptop with an expression of wounded innocence so perfect it could have been workshopped. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice soft and contrite. "I honestly thought that since the budget for the error log review falls under Barbara's oversight, she'd want to see the strategic angle. I was just trying to be efficient." He had a point. A technical, hollow, lawyerly point. Yes, Barbara oversaw the department budget. Yes, she theoretically cared about strategic insights. But the chain of command existed for a reason, and Mark knew it. He was counting on my reluctance to escalate a minor breach of protocol. He was counting on my desire to be seen as reasonable, collaborative, not the kind of manager who throws a tantrum over a single misdirected email. I let it slide. That was my second mistake. By week 3, Mark had befriended Barbara's executive assistant, Jordan, a sharp-witted woman in her late 40s who had survived 4 different VPs and knew where every administrative body was buried. Jordan liked Mark because he brought her pastries from the artisanal bakery across the street and never treated her like a gatekeeper. I couldn't fault him for that. Jordan was delightful and genuinely kind, and I was glad someone was brightening her afternoons. But I also knew that Jordan had access to Barbara's calendar, her travel arrangements, her private meeting notes, and the unofficial pulse of the executive floor. Having Jordan on your side was a strategic asset. Mark knew this intuitively, the way some people know which fork to use at a formal dinner. He cultivated her not out of genuine friendship, but out of the same instinct that made him remember everyone's coffee orders. Information is power, and power flows through relationships. It was Jordan, I later learned, who casually mentioned to Mark that Barbara hated surprise budget overruns. Not just disliked, hated. Barbara had once fired a vendor for a hidden fee of less than $500. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because she couldn't stand the deception. Transparency was her religion. And Mark, being Mark, immediately began searching for ways to weaponize that information. He started with our time tracking data. Apex used a standard project management tool where engineers logged hours against specific task codes: development, testing, documentation, training, maintenance, and so on. Mark requested read-only access to the time logs for my team, ostensibly to understand our resource allocation patterns for his strategic overview project. I approved the request because it seemed reasonable. He was an intern after all, and learning how we track time was a legitimate educational goal. What I didn't realize was that Mark was combing through those logs with a fine-toothed comb, looking for anomalies he could reframe as inefficiencies. And he found one. The previous month, my 3 senior engineers had logged a total of 12 hours under the code for non-billable training. Those hours were part of a mandatory cybersecurity refresher course that HR had rolled out to the entire company, annual training, required by our defense contractors. The engineers had no choice in the matter. The hours were legitimate, approved, and completely non-controversial. But Mark didn't present them that way. Instead, he produced a color-coded spreadsheet titled Observations on Resource Allocation, which he sent to Barbara on a Friday afternoon, the classic time for burying bad news, when everyone's brain is already halfway to the weekend. In his cover note, he wrote, "I've noticed that senior engineering resources logged 12 non-billable training hours last month while client-facing deliverables were at risk of slipping. I'm not suggesting anything improper, but I thought leadership should be aware of potential efficiency gaps." The implication was clear. My team was wasting time on non-essential activities while client work suffered. Never mind that the training was mandatory. Never mind that the client deliverables were not, in fact, at risk of slipping. Mark had framed a routine compliance activity as evidence of managerial negligence, and he had done so in a way that made him look like a conscientious steward of company resources. I found out about the spreadsheet when Barbara forwarded it to me with a single question mark in the subject line. Just a question mark. That was Barbara's way of saying, "Explain this to me so I don't have to be annoyed." I called Mark into my office and closed the door. The glass walls meant everyone could see us, but at least they couldn't hear. I sat down across from him, not behind my desk, because I wanted him to feel the weight of direct eye contact and placed a printed copy of his spreadsheet on the table between us. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "these 12 hours of training were mandatory. They were approved by HR and required by our defense contracts. Did you verify that before sending this to Barbara?" He blinked, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not guilt, he was too polished for guilt, but maybe a flash of surprise that I had confronted him so directly. He recovered quickly, tilting his head in that innocent lamb posture he had perfected. "I didn't know they were mandatory," he said. "I just pulled from the system. I thought you'd want to know about any non-billable time." "You thought I'd want to know," I repeated slowly. "So you sent it to Barbara." "Not to me. To Barbara. She oversees the budget," he said, as if explaining something simple to a slow child. "I thought resource allocation fell under her purview." I took a long breath. "Mark, I am going to say this one more time, and I need you to hear me. You come to me first. Always. If you have a concern about how my team is spending time, you bring it to me. If you think something is inefficient, you bring it to me. Barbara is my boss, not yours. Your chain of command goes through me. Do you understand?" "Absolutely," he said, nodding vigorously. "I'm sorry for the confusion. It won't happen again." But we both knew it would. The only question was how. 2 weeks later, I overheard him at the coffee station. I had walked into the break room to refill my mug, and he was standing by the espresso machine with 2 other interns, a quiet young woman named Priya who worked in marketing and a boisterous finance intern named Derek. They didn't see me round the corner. I stood just out of sight, listening. "Yeah, my supervisor doesn't really understand agile methodology," Mark was saying, stirring sugar into his paper cup. "She's stuck in waterfall thinking. Great for 2015, but we're moving fast now." I tried to explain the benefits of continuous deployment, but she just wants her CSV files and her Gantt charts. Derek laughed. "Old school, huh?" "Old school is one way to put it," Mark said, and there was a smile in his voice. "Look, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus. But if you want to innovate, you can't have someone in the driver's seat who's still looking in the rearview mirror." I stepped into view. "Mark, my office. Now." The color drained from his face. Priya looked at the floor. Derek suddenly became very interested in his phone. Mark followed me to my office without a word. His leather portfolio clutched to his chest like a shield. I closed the door and sat down heavily. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just looked at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You have 2 choices," I said finally. "You can spend the rest of your internship trying to make me look bad, or you can do the work you were hired to do and learn something in the process. But if I hear you talking about me like that again to anyone, anywhere, at any time, I will end your internship so fast you won't have time to pack your leather portfolio. Do we understand each other?" Mark nodded. His jaw was tight, but his voice was steady. "Yes. I'm sorry. It was unprofessional." "Yes, it was," I said. "Now get back to work." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the fear of consequences would rein him in, that he would retreat to his cubicle and quietly complete his internship with a letter of recommendation that he would never use. I was wrong, because Mark had stopped seeing me as a supervisor he needed to impress. He now saw me as an enemy he needed to destroy. The escalation happened slowly, like a fever rising. First, he started documenting everything. Every email I sent, Every request I made, every minor correction I offered, he saved it all in a folder on his personal laptop. He began keeping a daily journal of our interactions, writing down what I said and when I said it, always framing my words in the most negative possible light. A request to redo a poorly formatted report became unreasonable expectations. A reminder to arrive on time for a client call became hostile communication. He was building a dossier piece by piece and I didn't know it. Second, he started cultivating allies. He took Jordan out for coffee twice a week and listened sympathetically when she complained about Barbara's demanding schedule. He bought lunch for the junior developers and asked them about their career frustrations. He joined the company's DI committee and the volunteer organizing group, positioning himself as a kind, thoughtful, community-minded presence. By mid-October, most people in the office had a positive impression of Mark. He was the nice intern, the helpful one, the one who remembered your birthday and always had a kind word. And third, he started looking for my weaknesses. Not my professional weaknesses, those were well documented and unremarkable. Every manager has blind spots. Every project has failures. But Mark wanted something juicier, something he could use as leverage. He wanted a smoking gun. He found it on a Friday evening in late October, when I made the single biggest mistake of my entire career. I left my laptop unlocked while I ran to the restroom. It was 6:15 p.m. Most of the office had gone home. I had been reviewing a contract dispute with a vendor, a telecommunications company that had missed 3 consecutive deadlines for a firmware update. I was frustrated, tired, and frankly a little angry. I had written an email to my counterpart at the vendor, a man named Charlie who had been stringing me along for weeks. The email said, and I quote, "If these idiots miss another deadline, I'm pulling the contract and finding a new vendor. I don't care what the legal review says. This is amateur hour." It wasn't my finest moment. It wasn't professional. But it was a private email, sent to a vendor who had genuinely earned my frustration, and it contained no trade secrets, no confidential information, no personal attacks on anyone at Apex. It was just a tired manager venting in a way that should have stayed between me and Charlie. I hit send, closed my laptop halfway but not all the way, and walked to the restroom at the end of the hall. I was gone for maybe 4 minutes. When I came back, Mark was standing near my office door, talking to one of the night cleaning staff about something inconsequential. He smiled at me as I approached. "Just heading out," he said. "Have a good weekend." "You too," I said, and I sat down at my desk without a second thought. What I didn't know was that Mark had seen my laptop open when he walked by. He had glanced through the glass wall of my office, seen the screen still lit, and made a split-second decision that would change everything. He slipped into my office, opened my email, searched for recent messages, and found the one to Charlie. He forwarded it to his personal Gmail account, along with 2 other emails from the past week, one where I had mildly criticized a junior developer's code quality, and another where I had joked to a colleague that Mark needs to learn that PowerPoint isn't a substitute for substance. Then he closed my laptop, walked out, and pretended nothing had happened. He spent that entire weekend crafting a narrative. He printed the emails, highlighted key phrases, and wrote a 6-page complaint letter to HR, copied to Barbara, accusing me of creating a hostile work environment. He claimed that I had routinely used unprofessional and derogatory language about external partners. He claimed that I had retaliated against him for raising concerns about budget tracking by confronting him in my office. He claimed that I had created a culture of fear and intimidation that made it difficult for him to do his job. He submitted the complaint at 8:01 a.m. on Tuesday morning, just as Barbara was settling into her office with her first cup of tea. At 9:15, Barbara called me into her office. Mark was already there, sitting in the corner on a small wooden chair, his leather portfolio on his lap. He looked pale but composed. He did not meet my eyes. Barbara looked exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her usually immaculate bun was slightly lopsided. She slid a thick folder across her desk toward me. "I've received a formal complaint," she said, her voice flat. "Mark has alleged that you've created a hostile work environment, used unprofessional language about external partners, and retaliated against him for raising concerns about budget allocation. HR is requiring an investigation." I opened the folder. The first page was a printout of my email to Charlie. The phrase "these idiots" was highlighted in yellow. The second page was my email about the junior developer's code marked up with comments about undermining feedback and lack of constructive guidance. The third page was my joke about Mark in PowerPoint, framed as mockery of an intern's contributions. My mouth went dry. My hands, resting on the edge of Barbara's desk, began to tremble slightly. I looked at Mark, sitting there in his corner, and I saw something in his expression that I will never forget. Not triumph exactly, but a kind of quiet satisfaction. The satisfaction of a chess player who has just moved his opponent into check. "Barbara," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "this is absurd. You know me. You've known me for 5 years. I've never had a single complaint. Not one. You know how I manage. You know I'm direct but fair. And these emails, yes, I said idiots about Charlie. It was unprofessional. I shouldn't have. But it was a private email to a vendor who has cost us tens of thousands of dollars in missed deadlines. It's not harassment. It's not a pattern. It's frustration." "I know," Barbara said softly, and I could see in her eyes that she believed me. I could see her wrestling with the conflict between her trust in me and the formal process that now demanded her attention. "But HR has to investigate. You know that. Mark has documentation. He's made specific allegations. We have to take them seriously." "What documentation?" I asked. "These 3 emails? That's it." "He also provided a written log of interactions," Barbara said, tapping the folder. "Dates, times, quotes. He claims you've been targeting him since week 2. He claims you threatened to end his internship during a private meeting in your office." I closed my eyes. I did say that, but only after I heard him bad-mouthing me to other interns at the coffee station. He was telling people I don't understand Agile, that I'm stuck in the past, that I'm an obstacle to innovation. I confronted him about it, and I told him that if he continued to undermine me, I would end his internship. That's not retaliation. That's management. "I understand," Barbara said. "But his log doesn't mention the coffee station conversation. His log says you called him into your office without warning and threatened him for no reason." My heart sank. Of course he hadn't mentioned the coffee station. Of course his log was curated to make him look like an innocent victim and me look like a bully. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and I had been playing checkers while he played chess. "I have witnesses," I said. "Priya and Derek. They were at the coffee station. They heard what he said." Barbara nodded slowly. "We'll talk to them. But for now I'm sorry, but I have to put you on administrative leave while the investigation proceeds. It's standard protocol when there's a complaint of this nature. You can go home, you can check your email once a day for urgent matters, but you can't come into the office and you can't communicate with any team members about the investigation. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Administrative leave. A black mark on my record even if I was exonerated. 5 days at home, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my career was over because a 22-year-old with a leather portfolio had outmaneuvered me. How long? I asked. HR says 2 to 3 weeks. I'll fight for faster, but I can't promise anything. I stood up slowly. I looked at Mark one more time. He was still staring at his portfolio, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Just a fraction of an inch. Just enough. I walked out of Barbara's office, past the cubicles where my team sat in stunned silence, past Jordan at her desk with her hand over her mouth, past the glass walls and the whiteboards and the coffee station where it all began. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat and cried for 10 minutes. Then I drove home and waited. The investigation took 3 weeks. 18 business days of hell. During that time, I was forbidden from entering the office or contacting any Apex employee about work-related matters. I could only communicate with HR and Barbara through a designated email address, and every message was logged and reviewed. I spent my days in a fog of anxiety, refreshing my inbox every 20 minutes, jumping every time my phone buzzed. I also spent a lot of time thinking about how Mark had done it. The precision, the patience, the way he had built relationships, gathered intelligence, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. If I hadn't been the target, I might have been impressed. He had identified his goal, my job, or at least my removal, and executed a strategy with cold, methodical efficiency. He had turned my own team's respect for me into a potential liability, framing my directness as harshness, my high standards as hostility. He had used my trust in the basic decency of others as a weapon against me. And while I sat at home powerless, Mark was in the office every day, positioning himself as my interim replacement. He sent daily status updates to the entire department, always seeking Barbara and HR, always framed as helpful process improvements. He volunteered to lead the weekly stand-up meetings. He offered to triage the documentation backlog. He even scheduled a lunch and learn about Agile best practices, which half the team attended out of curiosity, and the other half attended because free pizza was involved. But Mark made his first real mistake during those 3 weeks. He got arrogant. He had tasted power even briefly and he wanted more. He started pushing boundaries, asking for access to systems and files that no intern should ever see. He began referring to himself jokingly, he said, as the acting team lead. He stopped bringing Jordan pastries because he no longer needed her goodwill. He stopped thanking the junior developers for their time. The mask was slipping and people were starting to notice. The decisive blow came from an unexpected direction. Jordan herself. One afternoon in the second week of the investigation, Mark asked Jordan for access to a shared drive containing historical project audits from 2018 to 2020. He said he needed them for background research on my team's performance patterns. Jordan, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Mark's behavior, hesitated. But Mark was persistent, and he had a way of making his requests sound reasonable, even urgent. He told her that Barbara had approved the access. He said it was part of the HR investigation. He lied to her face, and Jordan, trusting, overworked, exhausted by the drama, gave him the credentials. Mark spent an evening combing through those audits. He found a minor discrepancy in a 2019 report that I had signed off on. A vendor payment of about $8,000 had been coded to the wrong account, a simple clerical error, and had been corrected within 48 hours. The report had been reviewed and approved by Barbara herself, along with 2 members of the finance team. It was a nothing burger. A typo caught and fixed with zero financial impact. But Mark didn't see it that way. He saw an opportunity. He printed the relevant pages, highlighted the discrepancy in red, and prepared a new complaint for HR. Evidence of a pattern of financial negligence on the part of the senior project manager. What Mark didn't know was that Jordan, feeling guilty and increasingly suspicious of his behavior, had checked the drive access logs. She saw that Mark had requested the credentials after Barbara had left for the day. She saw that Barbara had never sent an email authorizing the access. And she saw that Mark had downloaded over 200 files from the audit drive, far more than necessary for any legitimate review. Jordan sat on this information for 2 days, wrestling with her conscience. Then on a Wednesday morning, she walked into Barbara's office, closed the door, and told her everything. Barbara's face went very still. She thanked Jordan, promised to handle it, and immediately called a meeting with HR. They pulled the server logs. They saw Mark accessing my email on the Friday evening. I left my laptop unlocked. They saw the forwarded messages to his personal Gmail account. They saw the unauthorized access to the audit drive. They saw a pattern of deliberate, calculated deception. On Thursday, HR interviewed Priya and Derek. Both confirmed my account of the coffee station conversation. Priya added that Mark had always seemed like he was playing a game, and that she had felt uncomfortable with how he talked about you behind your back. Derek, to his credit, admitted that he had laughed at the jokes but had known they were inappropriate. On Friday, HR interviewed the rest of my team. One by one, they described me as fair, direct, and demanding but never cruel. They described Mark as manipulative, politically obsessed, and someone who spent more time managing up than doing his actual job. The investigation concluded on a gray November afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after it began. Barbara called me at home and asked me to come to her office at 4 p.m. I walked into the building with my heart pounding. The receptionist gave me a small, sympathetic smile. Jordan nodded at me from her desk, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. I walked to Barbara's office, knocked on the open door, and stepped inside. Mark was not there. Barbara gestured to the chair across from her desk. She looked tired but relieved. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, the official summary of the investigation's findings. "The investigation is closed," she said. "Mark has been terminated for violations of data security, company ethics policy, and making false statements during an internal investigation. He has also been reported to his university's internship office. He will not receive academic credit for his time at Apex, and we have informed his program director of the reasons for his termination." I exhaled. A long, slow, trembling breath that I felt in my bones. I picked up the paper and read the summary twice just to make sure it was real. "He almost had me," Barbara said quietly. "I'm sorry. I should have trusted you from the start. But he was very, very good. The way he built his case, the way he documented everything, the way he framed your actions in the worst possible light, it was manipulative, but it was skillful. He almost convinced me that you had a problem with anger management." I read it 3 times. Then I handed the phone back to Barbara. "He wanted my job," I said. "It wasn't a question." Barbara nodded. "He wanted a job. Any job. He thought the fastest way up was over your body. He thought if he could make you look bad enough, they'd give you to him. Your role, your salary, your reputation. All of it." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the November sky was the color of old pewter. The parking lot was half empty, the evening rush already beginning. "What happens now?" I asked. "You go back to work on Monday," Barbara said. "I'm writing a formal letter of commendation for your personnel file, clearing you of all allegations. We're also revising our laptop lock policy. Automatic screen locks after 90 seconds of inactivity, company-wide. And I'm putting a note in Mark's file that will follow him if he ever applies to work here again, which he won't." I stood up to leave, then hesitated. One more thing. The vendor email to Charlie. The one with the word idiots. That was wrong. I shouldn't have written it. "I'll be more careful." Barbara nodded. "We all lose our temper sometimes. Just don't put it in writing." I walked back to my desk for the first time in 3 weeks. My cubicle was exactly as I had left it. Sticky notes on the monitor, a half-empty mug of cold coffee, a framed photo of my dog. On my chair, someone had placed a small cardboard box. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick cream-colored paper. It was from Mark. "I know you probably won't forgive me, and I don't expect you to, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I was wrong. You weren't the problem. I was. My family has been pushing me to succeed since I was old enough to walk. My business school is a pressure cooker where everyone is taught to disrupt and win at all costs. I bought into all of it. I told myself that you were standing in my way, that you were old and slow and holding the company back. But the truth is I was scared. Scared that I wasn't good enough to make it on my own merits. Scared that 3 months from now, I'd be back at my parents' house with no job and no future. So I tried to tear you down instead of building myself up. That was cowardly. It was cruel. And I am deeply, truly sorry. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I will carry the shame of it for a long time. Mark." I held the letter for a long time, reading and rereading it. Was it sincere? Partly, I think. Mark was young, and young people make terrible mistakes. But I also knew that he had written this letter after he had been caught, after all his schemes had collapsed, after he had nothing left to lose. It's easy to be sorry when you've already lost everything. The real test is whether you learn from it. I kept the letter for a week, folded in my desk drawer. Then on a quiet Sunday afternoon I threw it away. Not out of anger, just out of acceptance. Mark was no longer my problem. I don't think about him often anymore. But when I do, I remember something Barbara said to me in that final meeting, as I was walking out the door. Competition is healthy. Conspiracy is not. And the people who mistake the latter for the former never last long. That intern tried to get me fired. He lied, he manipulated, he violated data security and basic decency. And in the end, all he got was a lesson he didn't want to learn, a permanent asterisk in his employment history, a note in his academic file, and a handwritten apology that probably cost him more than any other 3 pages he has ever written. I, on the other hand, got a new rule. Never ever leave your laptop unlocked. Never assume that someone's smile means they wish you well. And never underestimate the damage a hungry, ambitious kid can do with just enough charm and just enough spite. Because the scariest thing about Mark wasn't his plan. It wasn't his patience or his precision or his ability to lie with a straight face. The scariest thing was how close he came to making it work.